convo, and this is not so obvious watches. First thing I've got to get out of the way. This is the first time I've ever tried to do this sort of thing. I'm probably going to be really bad. I'm probably going to have a whole bunch of habits that really annoy people. Please bear with me. I will promise to try and get better. Because this is my first time, I thought I'll keep this really simple and do a really simple sort of just piece to camera where I talk to you about something and I keep it really simple, keep the graphics there'll probably be no graphics, and I can just get this out and see how we go. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about is a retrospective. The 4 big things I noticed from 2018 that bear watching as we move forward into 2019 and beyond. In here I'm going to talk about 3 big changes that I saw and 1 comment on the status quo and what that might mean moving forward. When we talk about the 3, let's talk about the 3 changes I saw. The first is a significant watch. The Omega 300M Seamaster, or the Omega Seamaster 300M, was a clear statement of intent by Omega. It was a radical redesign of an already quite popular but limited watch, a watch which had found its place as second fiddle. A watch which took a once great brand like Omega, probably a still great brand, but a brand which lived at the very top of the hierarchy and almost confirmed that it was now 1 rang down. With the new Seamaster, Rolex has said, with the new Seamaster, Omega has said, that's not good enough. We're aiming for the top. Now they might not make it. They might not, the design might not have hit the nail on the head. People might not have liked the design, and as a result Rolex won't, I keep making that mistake, don't I? And Omega won't make that leap forward that they're hoping to. It could be that the design is great, but let's be honest, this is a fairly conservative community. The new 300M does represent a break from the past. There's every possibility that no matter how good the design is, we just won't warm to it, or we won't warm to it fast enough for Omega to get the benefits that they want out of this. Either way, the 300M is a really important watch in my opinion, because it's a sign that Omega is staking its claim. Omega is no longer happy to be second fiddle, and I think it shows that Omega is stretching to be more than it has been over the last decade, and I think it's probably a precursor for future models that will also push forward and try and be more than they have been. Okay, so that's number 1. Number 2, we're going to talk about a whole brand which is taking a change, and this is Breitling. Breitling, I'm a fan, and even I was surprised to find that Breitling is actually a huge player. They produce over 500,000 watches a year, well over 500,000 watches a year, and have been doing that for over a decade. And looking at what Wristwatch Annual, for example, tells me about production numbers, that even seems to be increasing, not coming backwards. And yet, I think anyone who's sort of feeling for the zeitgeist in this community would feel that there was something going wrong at Breitling, that Breitling had at best stalled and at worst was going backwards. And so a change was needed, and a change has been made. A new CEO, but also a whole bunch of really risky changes. They've dropped the wings from the Breitling logo. They're making a clear statement that Breitling is not just about air, but it's land, sea and air. There's a real statement that Breitling, the new Breitling, will be a broader Breitling. The removal of the wings, the subtle changes to styling where there's more style in the watches, less polish, more variation of finish, more sophisticated cases in the Premier line, quite radical experiments with the Navigator, with the Navitimer 8. There's smaller watches, a lot of 38 and 40 and 41 millimeter watches. Changes to the way they present, less detailed, cleaner dials. There's a real, just across the entire portfolio, there's a real breath of fresh air through Breitling. Now this might not work, or it might work. But either way, I think I saw that as one of the four big changes in the industry, and something that really needs to be watched moving forward. When I was researching this, I was looking at all the other things that were going on, and I was thinking about the Panerai luminol duo, changes at Baume & Mercier, the creation of the Baume brand. What else was there? The release of the Polaris from JLC. There was sorry, just let me quickly check my notes because there's a lot going on. Oh, revamp, obviously, at Mont Blanc, the revamp of the Cartier Santos line. And as I'm walking through this, I began to realize that there's one thing in all of those changes, and that's Richemont. The Richemont group seems to have, across the entire group, made a decision that it is not good enough to be whatever it was. That it has to be more, that every brand, not just one or two parts of it, every brand of Richemont needs to broaden its appeal. Panerai needs to come out with something that's less of a hardcore tool watch that can be worn by smaller guys, can be worn by women, will want to be worn by smaller guys, and want to be worn by women. I don't believe that the Duo's lack of water resistance was an accident. I think it was a deliberate choice to say, we're making a dress watch. Polaris was not a radical redesign, but certainly quite a risky reinterpretation of a classic watch in the JLC community, and has been made the centerpiece of a lot of their advertising. A lot of the discussion around JLC now is around the Polaris. Interestingly, that's a very tooly watch for JLC and really does change the feel of that brand. Likewise with the Santos, which is revolutionary in many ways, and also takes what has always been quite a dress looking watch and made it much more obviously a tooly type of watch. Oh, I left off, by the way, I shouldn't forget, there was also within that Vacheron line, there's within Richemont Group, there's the Vacheron line, which is introduced in the 56, its cheapest model for as long as I can remember, and in fact going back through my records, as long as I can find Vacheron having a watch, I can't find one that's selling for a price point as low as this one, the 56 steel does, at 17,000 Australian dollars. That's a huge stretch, albeit downwards, for Vacheron, and fits into this idea that Richemont as a group has decided that it wants to change, and it wants to change by changing everything. So I think those are the three things we should all be watching out for next year. What happens with the 300M? Will it push Omega forward? Will it be the precursor of a number of these changes where Omega clearly tries to push into that Rolex territory? What's going to happen with Breitling? Will these changes take hold? Will an already large company press forward to become one of the significant players within that crucial kind of $5,000 to $20,000 range of the upper mid-market of Swiss watch brands? And then finally, of course, what the hell is going to happen with Richemont? Will all of this work? In fact, all of it doesn't have to work. There's so much going on with the Richemont. Only some of it needs to work. If it does, and even if the parts that don't kind of learn from the parts that do and make subsequent changes over 2019 and 2020, this could actually change the axis of the whole industry. So I think those are the three big changes that I noticed and that I think we should look forward. There was one other thing that I think was really important to note out of 2018, and that was what we saw about Rolex, and both the intensity of feeling for that company, but also the limits of the feeling for that company. And this is really nicely encapsulated by the frenzy around the Pepsi GMT. A watch with a US MSRP of, I think it was about $7 grand, maybe $8 grand. Within a couple of days of being launched, they're turning up on the secondary market selling for $24,000 US, a 300% markup. And yet, here we are in 20, and that change, that frenzy flowed across into other parts of the business. The Batman went from, again, an MSRP of $7,000 to $8,000. Suddenly it's trading for $18,000. And subs went the same way. Daytonas had already been quite overpriced, quite overheated. That went even further. And yet now, as we sit back at the end of 2018 and look, oh, sorry, I left one thing out, and that love of particularly the steel Rolexes, which is a little note we'll come back to, flowed even down to Tudor, where Tudor was starting to sell above retail. And there were waiting lists for Tudor products, particularly the GMT and the new Black Bay 58. Okay, so now we get back to the end of 2018, and what do we find? What we find is that the bubble has not burst, but the air is certainly coming out of it. Those prices, $24,000 US for a Pepsi, that's kind of dropped down now to around about 18, I'm hearing. And on Federico Turk's watches recently, Federico said he has seen one change hands recently for 15. Now that's still double price, but that is not 24,000. Likewise, we've seen the same with the Batmans. They've dropped from a high of 18 to right now you can jump on Chrono and find any number of people who'll sell you them for 14 to 15, and I suspect that even that's probably inflated. Having watched a lot of the pricing, having had a little sort of informal monitoring program going on the Rolexes over the last couple of months, what I'm seeing is an awful lot of those Rolexes that are advertised on Chrono aren't moving. That there are ballpark about 200, 250 GMT, Pepsis and Batmans for sale right now on Chrono, and my quick observation is that very few of them are shifting or have shifted in months. So clearly I think what you've got is a lot of people who are perhaps bought in. Maybe these people selling aren't actually secondary buyers, maybe they're tertiary buyers, but for it, and they're looking to, they're risking losing money, but who can tell? The real issue here is the air has come out of those prices and they've fallen back. They're still very high, but they're not insane. The same has happened with Tudor. Tudor supply, for one, has probably ramped up, but secondly, as the air has come out of the Rolex market, that's taken the air out of the Tudor market, and now Tudors are trading at places like Joma Shop at between 1 and 3% of 1 and 3% off. So that's still pretty good. The average kind of discount on a reasonable watch at places like Joma Shop will be probably 10 to 15% below retail. So these are solid watches, they're doing okay, but they're clearly available. They're clearly not the hot item that they were. The other thing so what we really noticed out of Rolex is that people love Rolex. Rolex is absolutely the king of the hill, but in that really crucial 5 to 20,000 US dollar price range. That is kind of that seems to be the magic sweet spot in where you can generate the most profit. You can have the highest markup and still produce $1 million watches a year. You can have a higher markup on a watch that's $50,000, but you can't sell 1 million of them a year. So I think that's the really key market, and what we saw is Rolex continues to be the king. But we saw that there are limits. They run out of oxygen above 20k. Any watch above $20,000 that Rolex sells is readily available at a discount. Any watch that has a lot of precious metals in it, which is normally going to be watches over the $20,000 also runs out of oxygen and is readily available on discount at secondary buyers. So Rolex is the king, but is the king of steel sports watches, and that is both its home plate, its castle, but also it seems to be its only natural home. It's right now, unless something changes, it's unlikely that Rolex is going to be able to go beyond that. And that it'll be interesting to see if Rolex tries to go beyond that, or simply says, this is our space, we're going to hold our space here, and maybe uses Tudor or some other brand, maybe in the future, to go to spaces where the Rolex name doesn't seem to go, or can't go because it would risk its home plate. So, in summary, the 4 things I noticed. The first is Omega's making a play for be the king of the hill in that $5,000 to $20,000 US range, and the 300M is leading the charge. Secondly, Breitling is not happy with where it is at the moment, which is still not a bad place. I mean, someone just paid near as damn at 900 million US to buy the company, so it can't be too bad, but they're clearly not happy with that. The new owners want to take it somewhere new and is prepared to make massive changes across the brand. And if that takes place, massive changes across a large brand like Breitling will have big impacts on the market. Thirdly, the Richemont Group as a whole is changing. Whether that's Panerai, whether that's Vacheron, whether that's Montblanc, whether that's JLC, whether that's Baume & Mercier or a new brand, or even how they sell watches through their procurement of, I think it was Watchfinder. Big changes happening across that whole group that could be industry changing. And finally, Rolex is still the king of the hill. However, its power is limited. It's not an absolute ruler. We will be interesting to see what that means and how Rolex might deal with that moving forward. So anyway, that's it. That's what I noticed. What about you? Did you notice anything different? Do you think I'm completely off base? I would love to hear comments below. Please be gentle with me. This is my first go and I'm really fascinated to see how this goes, but I promise I'll get better. If you can like and subscribe, that's great. I really want to do something with this channel. I'm not really sure what, but we'll talk about that more possibly in the next video. Thanks very much. Hope you had a great 2018, and I look forward to being on 2019 with you.